Sherlock Holmes movie review. So this is a review of the 2009 Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie. I'll give some brief background on my own association with Sherlock Holmes first. I consider myself a casual fan, but not a huge fan. Meaning I have read all the Sherlock Holmes stories. Volume 1 and then Volume 2 here in the Sherlock Holmes, the complete novels and stories. I didn't read them when I was very young and formative. I read them as an adult. Volume 1 I read in my late 20s. I waited about 10 years to get to Volume 2 and read that in my late 30s. So I've enjoyed them, but they didn't have like a huge impact on me, and I've not read them obsessively. Like I don't have them memorized, or I've not read and reread them, I've just read them once. Okay, so all of that is my background with Sherlock Holmes. This movie has Sherlock Holmes fighting the occult, or matching wits against the occult, which, when I first realized what the premise of this movie was, I thought, oh no, I don't want to see Sherlock Holmes fighting magic. I want to see Sherlock Holmes trying to solve crimes with ordinary criminals. This is not a Sherlock Holmes story. And sure enough, I don't think that is a traditional Arthur Conan Doyle story, although some of these do get a little bit out on the edge with some rather fantastic stuff, but that's not certainly the majority of these stories. However, if you go to Wikipedia and you look at all the portrayals of Sherlock Holmes on screen, which date back all the way to the silent films, and there's just tons of them, from the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s and on and on and on, a fair amount of those movies can get rather bizarre. So in terms of Hollywood portrayals of Sherlock Holmes, or in terms of Sherlock Holmes on the screen, this probably fits right in. And spoilers, it does turn out in the end that he's not really fighting magic. There's some sort of logical explanation towards everything that appears to be supernatural at the beginning. Although I think some of these quote-unquote logical explanations are a little bit of a stretch. They seem to rely on some sort of pseudoscience or steampunk technology, or, it's how realistic it is maybe up for debate, but there's no invoking of the supernatural by the time you get to the conclusion of this. As you're watching the movie, the audience does not get any of the clues that are necessary to solve the puzzle. So, it's just kind of a surprise out of nowhere at the end. But as I've noted in my reviews of the Sherlock Holmes stories, which I've reviewed before on this channel, a lot of the Arthur Conan Doyle stories operate the same way. Whereas in the Sherlock Holmes stories, you often don't get enough information to solve the riddle either. And in fact, you very rarely does the reader get enough information. So that's the same with the movie. The movie had the rather interesting casting choice of casting two people that you would not associate with Holmes and Watson, at least if you're going off the way they've traditionally been portrayed in Hollywood. Sherlock Holmes is Robert Downey Jr., and Jude Law is Watson. Now, if you consider Sherlock Holmes as normally like a stuffy English detective, then Robert Downey Jr. is nothing like that, but so much the better, really. I mean, I'm all up for a new take on the character, some fresh casting, and Robert Downey Jr. is incredibly charismatic, so just about anything he does is interesting. They've got a bit of a different take on the Holmes-Watson relationship as well, where they play them constantly bickering back and forth with each other, like they're an old married couple, which is funny in theory. As I was watching it actually play out, though, on the screen, I didn't think it was as funny as it could have been the way it actually played out. In fact, I thought the bickering between them got a little bit boring and repetitive. So I like the idea in concept. I didn't think it was all that funny in execution, especially as it was kind of a one-note joke that just got repeated throughout the movie. But, you know, a lot of this comedy is, it's just all up to individual taste, isn't it? So let me know how well you thought that worked in the movie. It's also an action movie. Now, again, this is a difference between Hollywood Sherlock Holmes and the book Sherlock Holmes. In the book Sherlock Holmes, there's very little action. And this actually surprised me a little bit when I read through this, because before I read the stories, I had seen some Hollywood depictions of Sherlock Holmes. Even before the 2009 Guy Ritchie movie, I think just any time Sherlock Holmes is on screen, the final climactic confrontation with the bad guy usually ends with some sort of chase or some sort of confrontation that's always a little bit more dramatic than it usually is in the books. So I was surprised actually with how little adventure and violence there was in the books when I finally got around to reading them. But in Hollywood, they always make a big confrontation with the bad guy, and, you know, I understand that completely. I think that's what the big screen lends itself for, is these more dramatic action moments. Now, this movie has a lot of Guy Ritchie styles with the action scenes. A lot of close-up, dizzying quick cuts between shots, excuse me. The speeding up and slowing down of the action, which I don't know. I don't feel like I enjoyed that. And again, this comes down to individual taste, so let me know how it works for you. I felt like during these action scenes, I was trying to concentrate very hard to actually follow what was happening instead of enjoying the spectacle of it all. So, I don't know, I didn't hate it completely, but I'm not sure it really worked for me. I didn't enjoy it per se. I certainly wasn't overwhelmed and thrilled with the spectacle of the action. I was slightly confused by the action scenes. So, yeah, that's my review, more or less. I thought it was okay. I think a number of the choices that they made in this film seemed to sound like they would be good choices, but didn't quite work in the execution for me, and sometimes I have a hard time putting my finger on exactly why, but I just felt like the action scenes were a little bit hard to follow, and the comedic parts maybe weren't quite as funny as they should have been. But let me know what you thought about this film.